So welcome everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Self-Sabotage and Supervisors webinar, how your PhD can be hell. And I'm delighted to also introduce and thank my colleagues, part of the catalytic team, Helen and Hayley, who are there sorting out the technology behind the scenes, answering questions in the chat, and putting in some links as and when they are required. So what we're going to be talking to you about today is the journey for the next 57 minutes, is a little bit of context about why we're doing this webinar. Going to talk around supervisors and the challenges that they can present. Then we're going to look at, it always confuses me on this roadmap because the furthest away comes in before, but self-sabotage. What are the kind of things that we do? What are those chimps doing, shaking around the insides of our heads and diverting our attention? And why does it happen? Why is it never the same for everybody? Different things distract different people. And 3 actions and a planning worksheet, if we can make it through to the end. Hopefully buckle your seatbelts, and we're going to check in with a poll for those who are here. Are you a doctoral researcher, a supervisor, or something else? Helen could launch the chat, and I will catch up with the responses shortly. Have you launched? Is the poll launched?
Yes, the poll's launched, and I'm still admitting people as well.
Oh, cool. I can't see the poll. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this webinar was because I've just finished writing a report for a client which looks at well-being and mental health for early career researchers. So it's quite a broad group of people, from doctoral researchers, postdocs, all the way through to research fellows, people in the early stages of their research career. And in particular, the report was looking at engineering. And to be frank, it's a bit concerning. There are very few large-scale studies, and even the larger scale, those large studies, very few look specifically at engineering. And partly, I think, because the people who participate in this, these qualitative and often survey and interview-based studies, they're self-selected. Few of them are engineers, rarely enough to actually present a significant cohort. So there's a lot of low-level understanding. And engineers perhaps aren't so interested in participating. They're the least likely, according to a couple of people I interviewed, the least likely people to seek support when they are not feeling too brilliant about life, their PhD, and quite often they don't seek help until it's really too late. So while I was looking at these all these sort of literature, one thing struck me was they were all looking at similar factors, and few looked at the individual traits of the researcher themselves, and set me thinking around the kinds of things that could be done to help mitigate it. And I wanted to do this webinar because I had some interesting experiences in my own PhD, not least when my supervisor, or one of them, came to me on a Friday and said, "Oh, I'm off to Barcelona next week." Fantastic. Have a lovely time, I said. "Well, I'm going for a year," he said. "Oh," I said. "Yes," he said. And off he went. And I didn't hear a dicky bird for a whole 12 months until he came bouncing back. And so luckily I had a really lovely other supervisor who was really super helpful. So we will be giving you an action planning worksheet to help prepare for supervisor meetings, which kind of is going to look a little bit like this. It's to enable you to take control and ownership in preparation for a meeting, so that you're understanding more about what it is that you want to get out of specific meetings. I don't know if you can mute yourself, Helen, please. Thank you. Wonderful. So why me? Why now? Why this webinar? And it's really about that understanding things I had known at the beginning of my PhD, that I really wasn't just that I was intolerant and lacked patience, but the tedium of running, long experiments sitting there, and I had to be by the kit, making sure contacts, etc., didn't fall off when it cooled down in temperature. And it was the understanding and realization that I started doing things that my brain was active in terms of finding things to do, but also helping me get involved in community and social activities, supporting undergraduates, and also going and doing outreach in schools. I never expected to end up doing coaching or working to what we're doing now at Catalytic, which is building inclusive ecosystems in engineering and science. Just a little bit about what we do here at Catalytic. We do a lot of work around building inclusive ecosystems, around helping people communicate and collaborate, design better, thinking about the diversity of users. We help people build better partnerships. We love using the Clifton Strengths tool to support group and personal coaching. But we also have an inclusive engineering health check tool to help people design the engineering programs that they're working on, to think more broadly around what inclusion means in the context of engineering. And we also have a group coaching program called Momentum, which is small peer groups that come together. We've been supporting doctoral researchers for a good number of years, working in particular with Brunel, UCL, and over the last 12 months with Warwick, helping to help other doctoral researchers how to manage their supervisors using Clifton Strengths, exploring wellbeing and doing a literature review, but also about resilience and leadership, how that can help give you a really strong foundation for your career. And I don't know if you're familiar with this curve, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it always elicits a few chuckles. So feel free to give us some emoticons and reactions in the chat if you can identify with this. When you start off with your PhD, super excited, raring to go, exploring the background, the literature, talking to people, really fired up about this new phase in your life. And then you get to this sort of peak of excitement, and it's been dubbed the peak of Mount Stupid. And when it's that realization lands on you, and it's that, oh, and how did so many things I don't know about? And some people, I think it was Kate mentioned in the chat, that she gets distracted in the morning by scrolling and looking at the news, and probably her literature collection is huge compared to other people's, because she's just a magpie for knowledge and information. But also she'd get great joy out of being able to share that knowledge and information with other people. And that's a really great way, if you have too much stuff, is find somebody to pass it on to. I thought of you. How about this? So after this peak of Mount Stupid, we crash into the valley of despair. And the slope of enlightenment, this lovely smooth curve that we're transitioning up to, has gone to, I seem to have lost my, have I lost myself, my screen share? No, don't know why my face has suddenly gone into a different kind of mode. So apologies for that. And so we get the plateau of sustainability, and of course, easy life, right up, finished, tickety-boo, rah, 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 it's all over with. But of course, the reality, I love this, is from Patricia Sisson, one of her papers, Patricia Jackman, and it shows the reality of what that curve is like. All those sort of milestones depicted by the flags, the valleys, the cliffs, the lakes, it have to be navigated, and that final point where the clouds form and doom and gloom, and then all of a sudden we find the flag in the distance. It is indeed a journey of highs and lows. We have these sort of, and this is another Sisson et al. Depiction of the highs and lows of the PhD. And whereabouts are you on that journey? I was hoping that Helen might prod me with the, so I know who's in the poll results. We've got the poll results. No, I can't. We'll look at the poll result later. So the highs and lows of the PhD, from that initial excitement, confidence, happiness, motivation, through to stress, fatigue, lack of sleep, about all those things that come with moving into that point where we're not living on dopamine anymore. We're just fired on adrenaline, and it's 24/7. And it's a lovely T-shirt if you've got to wear it. But the reality is that amongst graduate students, graduate researchers, that anxiety and well-being, poor well-being, are rife. There are many issues that can sway and cause these challenges that really cause us to struggle. I know when I got to about 2 years through mine, and I was doing it as I was doing contract research, and I was ready to leave, and everyone in the family was going, "You're halfway through, just keep going." And as though it's just this sort of predicated endpoint. But one of the challenges that there is not necessarily an endpoint. One of the guys, when I was writing my PhD, he had discovered that he was from Turkey, and he enjoyed drinking Guinness and playing pool. And he did an awful lot of drinking Guinness and playing pool. And the only way he could get himself to go and spend days in the lab doing his experiments was to buy himself an air ticket. And we called it the physical limitation theory. And I think a whole cohort of about 20 of us ended up using the physical limitation theory to help us have deadlines that we stuck to and that were non-extendable. And this guy used to go home for a month to Turkey, and he would come back and he would drink Guinness, shoot pool, buy an air ticket, spend 2 or 3 weeks in the lab 24/7, write the reports, slide it under his supervisor's desk, and go to Turkey for a month. But this Hakan really helped us all as a cohort, so we extend huge thanks to him. The risk factors for doctoral researchers cause depression, anxiety, suicidality across the UK for postgraduate researchers. And these are caused by loneliness, exacerbated during the ongoing pandemic, about imposter thoughts, not being worthy, about being amongst all these incredibly clever people, even people who've had quite big and senior jobs before they come into their PhD can feel like they don't belong because suddenly there's an expertise and knowledge amongst the academic community. They don't feel quite like they fit. They're not quite right. There's perceptions of failure because we're not necessarily schooled to think of how we can learn best from our failures. And then it comes down to that communication with supervisors and the perception that we've had a communication, a two-way exchange of information, and understanding and that the relationship with the supervisor isn't static, it evolves over time. So it's understanding the challenges, and a lot of the research focuses on these experiences and the causes of anxiety and depression and those sort of negative aspects of doing research, perfectionism, workaholism, and how we can improve it. And things almost get worse in the postdoctoral years. I didn't want to really disappoint you, but the research shows that in that postdoctoral 1 to 7 year phase, that job security isn't necessarily there. That the clarity over what the work actually is, again, might not be quite there. Depending on your life stage and work life stage, whether you have a family, whether you're UK or overseas, and split up from who you're living, your significant others, there can be all sorts of challenges that make it difficult. And a recent article in the Royal Society of Chemistry magazine was around the high level of bullying and harassment and dissatisfaction. It sounds pretty dull. Why would anybody want to do it? But we're driven to it, aren't we? We love it. So the kind of way that that people measure psychological distress and quantify symptoms like depression and anxiety are balanced against that psychological well-being, which is described as feeling good and functioning effectively. So, oopsie daisy. So there's a number of papers that look into this, and they go across. They're both within the occupational literature as well as in science and engineering literature, and also the academic research, the literature that looks at academic research and environments. So I've created this sort of figure which captures the stress factors. So we've got five main domains, and I've sort of added in from somebody else's paper a few examples, but also the personal factors piece, because a lot of the literature doesn't necessarily look into the personal factors, and I'll mention that in a moment. And so long hours, that poor work life and poor self-care culture that comes in, and quite often that is modelled from a supervisor's perspective. The systemic factors that are prevalent across academia, the competition, the pressure to produce results, the limits by the funding from the funding agency, if you're lucky enough to have funding, you have to do certain things and provide reports at 9 months and various other stages. And again, the systemic factors around supervisors. Supervisors, we'll talk about it again in a little bit more detail in a minute, but supervisors who aren't that necessarily driven to be the best supervisor ever. And although they're strongly encouraged to attend training programs, perhaps they've had so many successful PhDs, they don't need to tap into any more training to learn how to do it better. The culture, there can be isolation. It depends if you're working in a big research group, or are you working on a project that's very different to the rest of a supervisor's research team. What's the culture like in the discipline, for example? Is it a discipline that has a combative style of discussion? And we can see differences between engineering and physical sciences moving into the sort of more business-oriented disciplines and the social sciences, where it's harder to present some ideas and arguments without being squashed down, where people don't necessarily have a more open or humble inquiry approach of asking questions. It's much more about squashing and using their own research and arguments and recent papers to push back and say, well, why your arguments or approach might be wrong. But sadly as well, within cultures, there are still significant elements of bullying and harassment occurring. Quite distressing really to read that in this day and age in 2022. But also in terms of engineering, I don't know how many of you are engineers, but in the engineering discipline, there seems to be a reluctance to seek help. There seems to be a kind of a pushback on talking around emotion. Not everybody, because there is huge diversity among the engineering disciplines and among engineers themselves. But this is a couple of things that have been flagged. But also within engineering, the historically marginalised and minoritized groups are different than in other disciplines, whether that's about being female, about some of the banter in engineering towards LGBTQ plus individuals, and whether it's about coming from overseas and not feeling like you fit into if there's a stronger British culture within your lab, or whether it's about being within a predominantly white research group and you come from a different ethnic background. So lots of different factors that really can cause stress for people within their beginning of their research career. But you know, the one thing that really stood out for me looking at the literature was the lack of consideration of intersectionality, the lack of consideration of people's life stage and the pressures about being a parent and an early career researcher or doctoral researcher, but also individual circumstances where in terms of who you're living, your background, whether you have any financial support or not. But also the thing that really, 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 really stood out for me was individual traits. So of all the things that were described around causing stress of early career researchers was the personality traits or the individual behavioral traits and tendencies of the PhD researchers. So what do I mean by that? What I'm talking about, if you are an individual who is really driven to work super hard and is also really good at finding problems, the challenges are that you are going to drive yourself. Your work ethic is going to be mega. It's going to be really, really high. And your belief is that you just need to work harder to get things done, when in fact, sometimes it's about looking after your self-care and putting you in your own to-do list and stepping back and finding an accountability partner. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But first of all, supervisors attract so much research about supervisors. And when I talk to students, and when I run the Managing Your Supervisor workshop for UCL, one of the people say, I just want a good supervisor. And there's this kind of idea of a good supervisor. So let's take a little bit of a look at supervisors. So, and what are the strategies that you can think about for building and managing that relationship? Bearing in mind that relationship changes over time. So there are supervisors, and this is a paper by Lee, and I can pass it, and if people are interested in the references, just ping me an email afterwards. So the literature review is not published yet; it's still with Warwick. So we have supervisors who have almost like a factory of students. They have a big research group. They have a process for how it operates, and students are expected to do X, Y, and Z at certain particular times. It's very structured, it's very organized. It works for some people who like to be guided, like a set of rails to work along, and it's pretty much guaranteed if you follow the process, you'll get it. Not necessarily are these PhD supervisors old school, but it's a formula that starts to work for them. And then we have these sort of four other types: the enculturation type, the critical thinking type, emancipation. It's more about mentoring. It's around facilitation and reflection, a kind of coaching style approach to helping individuals with their personal growth and reframing their professionalism around being this professional academic, all the way through to this relationship mode of supervising, which is around experience, and that is a style that evolves over time as the supervisor grows. And it kind of sounds and feels like that might be the more mature version of supervisor. And I'm not here to say otherwise. But the thinking around, where does a supervisor understand and get their learning? So their first-hand experience is as a research student themselves, and the other is what they have experienced or learned as they go along. And that can also vary depending on who their students are. They might have an incredibly challenging questioning student. They may have a student who's incredibly laid back and chilled, and not motivated by goals or deadlines, but enjoying the whole immersive experience of learning, and then loving learning about this and loving learning about that, and never forgetting and never always finding more things that they just love to learn around. In this paper, there was one of the supervisors, guess which style it comes from. It says, on day one, I tell them, you have 3 years. They're given a schedule. We are geared up for 3 years, and we know what can be reasonably achieved. And rather than what is a complete piece of work, we are much more focused. We treat it like a 9-to-5 job. There's something to be done. There's something to prepare for. We've got weekly timetabled slots. And if you don't turn up, start getting annoyed with them. And so it's kind of a very directive style. It's not for everybody. So what are the factors that help create these sort of more satisfying strategies that might help a candidate achieve success? Van Ruij identified these 4 themes around the workload, the relationship, freedom, and belonging. The paper didn't really look at the difference in that relationship building around any commonality or any tool or method to help align where a student is compared to where a supervisor is. So some people are amazing. If you've ever come across them, about asking questions. They can just, I don't know, they seem to have this continual well of being able to ask questions. And for some people, that's great because they can ask questions back, or it stimulates them to think. I know sometimes, though, for me, I've been in situations, both in working in industry, but also in research, and also at home, where people will, are able to just question. And the net result is not there to make me necessarily think more broadly, although it does do that to an extent, but it also starts to undermine my confidence in what I know. I start questioning, do I really know this? Oh, I should have thought about that. Oh, that was interesting. Oh gosh, I need to go and do that. And again, depending on how you're wired as an individual, if you feel you're being over interrogated by someone's questions, it's the time to sort of pause it and say, wow, that's a lot of questions. Hell, let me pause a little bit and start thinking through what kind of things you're asking me to consider. And if you are the kind of person who has got that, like the guy at the beginning, the really high work ethic, and you give yourself these structured lists, the chances are you're likely to go shooting off with this massive list that you now have, stimulated by all these questions of finding the answers. And if, like Kate in the chat, you find that I need to go find information, I need to gather more, I need to watch more videos, I need to read more papers, suddenly you go to your next meeting and whoa, you've not actually done anything particularly constructive, but these apparently random questions you've just been asked are all being answered in some kind of way, but in an potentially unformed and not necessarily targeted or directed way. So knowing what you're like, knowing what your supervisor is like, is really, really important. And that comes not just from that interaction and knowledge exchange, because fundamentally that is what your PhD is. Your supervisor's helping you grow and learn in knowledge. So it's understanding how you can get those norms in those relationships, know when to push back and say, hey, I need to wait a moment, I've got too much going on here. So in terms of workload, let's go back to the top of that list of satisfier strategies. So about workload and hours of work. So somebody I was talking to recently, their supervisor is in the lab all times of the day and night. And they were worried because there was an expectation in the whole team that everybody should be there all the time. Nobody thought to ask, does the supervisor have a sleep problem? Have they overcommitted themselves to a funder? Have they set themselves some kind of challenge and deadline? Or do they know someone else is working on a similar thing in another lab somewhere else, and they're so competitive, they determined to get there first? So understanding about our own workload capacity, really super important. I kind of covered the relationship. I never like to follow things in the right order, so apologies. But it's around that relationship, about investing in it and revisiting it. Maybe the supervisor can also do that separately and do a bit of self-reflection. But if you're a doctoral researcher, again, something for you to do. And maybe every 2 or 3 months is have a meeting that is simply dedicated to how could we work better together? What do you need to be your best? How can I provide information at the right time? Get that sort of backwards and forwards. So it's very much around a growth mentality relationship. Freedom's a really important part of the doctoral research journey, about learning to undertake and manage and push forward the direction of research on your own. So getting that balance right as well, both from the researcher's perspective and also the supervisor's perspective, is really important. So at the beginning, it can be quite close and a less free relationship, but towards the end, there comes a sort of transition point when suddenly you're owning it, and you'll know it when you get there. So some really important things about those dissatisfactions about for both supervisor and researcher is around the additional things that you can get asked to do. So somebody, a friend's daughter, is working on a PhD and is being asked to write outlines for papers, conference submissions, to the point where it's becoming stressful and distracting from writing up. When do you say no? Also, teaching roles. Some of us do it as part of a contract and an expectation. Some because we enjoy it. Others because we need the money. Very simple, really. And so it's also that, depending on our background, whether we've gone straight in from university, some things might take us longer to do. And it's that sort of workload, maybe that we don't just have work within the university situation. It might be that we have to work in a bar outside. Again, some people need that and like that connection. For others, it becomes a necessity just to survive, let alone live or even indeed thrive. One of the challenges for some is around standalone projects. So if your project and you've got a new supervisor, or it's something that's a very much a side project, it can really become isolated when there's no connectivity between you and the rest of the group. So coming up with some ideas. So for a supervisor, it's really about thinking, how can I help ensure there's some connectivity? How can we facilitate cross-learning and cross-fertilization of ideas? And that can lead to not just the social isolation, not feeling part of the group, not being invited out to celebrate a new grant or something. It's the intellectual isolation. And for people who are really big thinkers, people who just love to roll ideas and concepts around inside their head, that intellectual isolation, on one hand, you might love it. It might be really your space. But for other people, they enjoy the stimulation of creativity of ideas. I know that's something that I really value. And as working in a small business, I find associates to work with where I can capture that. So it's about going out and finding it. And if you're a supervisor, being aware of it and helping the researcher to find those connections and networks in different universities, extending their network. It's really about building that belonging, the connectivity, and making sure that the right level of peer learning and connection and support and peer mentoring and even peer coaching, giving people coaching skills early in their career is really important. It's a growing thing in industry, and there are parts of academia that are using a coaching approach to helping people grow. So I don't know if you're connected and you look at the PhD comics, but I absolutely love it, and particularly this one. So this is how most professors see you, a brain on a stick, and saying, so how's research? How's things? Rather than actually probing behind and thinking, what else is going on? When the reality, how you see yourself, is this really amazing, deep, complex human being with hopes and dreams and aspirations, with a family, with a relationship, with a shared accommodation, with a partner in another country. It can be really difficult. And so, but it's that brain on a stick aspect is also, if we are not necessarily deeply socially connected, and we're the kind of people who don't do small talk, that can be quite hard to get beyond. So how's the research? Really generic, vague question. And as a supervisor, learn to ask better questions. Start with what? What would make this week a success for you? What was the best thing that you've done in the last week? Where's your greatest joy so far? What are the aspirations of the next 3 months? What would be a good milestone to work towards? Asking really good questions. And if you're the doctoral researcher, ask that kind of question back to your supervisor. Watch some videos on coaching. But it's not just the supervisor that sees you as the brain on the stick, is it? It's very easy to see your Nobel Prize winning supervisor, maybe your knighted supervisor, your supervisor who's got a huge research group, your supervisor who's got such an amazing intellectual international community of connections because they just love meeting new people. Maybe they're daunting because that's exactly what you don't do. So is your supervisor a brain on a stick as well? Give your supervisor a break. Check in with them. How are they getting on? What's the best piece of research that they've been working on in the last year? Turn those questions on the head and think through it. So I want to look a little bit more now about the self-sabotage. What are those chimps or the snakes that kind of get wrapped around our brains and help us to really struggle to make progress? So procrastination is one of the biggest problems, isn't it? about being able to stop getting distracted in the morning, about how we can really connect and get things done. You know, if we're really a massive thinker, getting that action list and ticking things off. I don't know if you might have an action list. I have a wish list. Just ask Helen and Haley. I've just collated the latest one, and it's about 4 pages long, not much. And so I can procrastinate. Whatever exciting or interesting thing lands in my inbox or thing that I found in my notebook, I can get distracted and diverted onto it. So procrastination, I talked to you about my colleague when I was doing my PhD. But, you know, it could just be that we aren't getting enough sleep when we fall asleep. It could be with the kind of person who lives in the moment. We need deadlines. But how do you get deadlines if you live in the moment about leaving things, about getting distracted? My best recommendation is to get yourself an accountability partner. Find somebody who's a little bit different than you that you can connect and check in with. And what are they going to do? Check in with somebody in the chat today. Find somebody. You could connect with somebody on LinkedIn, or somebody in your lab, or somebody if you're doing some kind of sports club. Find somebody, just have a regular time every week and check in with kind of like, it can take 15 minutes a week, or if it needs it, it can extend, share knowledge, share strategies, take people to networking events and have a coffee. Is that connect in and set those kind of deadlines to yourself? So if you're not a master procrastinator, leaving things to the last minute, maybe your chimp is about perfectionism. So it's got to be good. It's got to be amazing. You've got your transfer thesis sitting on your desk and it's all there looking nice and tickety-boo. And your supervisor wanders in every week or every month, whenever, and looks at it and thinks, is it ready yet? I had a boss once. I'd written an amazing little booklet on intellectual property management, and he would look over at it when we had a conversation. And then it was amazing at actually not saying, is it ready yet? And I just then had to sort of go through a process of being good enough. Have I missed something? But you know, when you do a transfer thesis, it's not the final document. And even when it is, you can make minor adjustments and tweaks, and that doesn't matter. One of my thesis amendments that was required, my external wanted me to turn 63 commas into semicolons. I'm sure it made him happy. Anyway, being a perfectionist about going for that flawless piece of work really can slow you down. And again, having a critical friend or two who will read things for you is really, really useful. Because if we end up being really tied to perfectionism about having every single piece, it can really affect your relationships. It can just stop you never, ever finishing anything. And the only bad thesis is the not submitted and not examined thesis. And so knowing the right thing is really important. One of the things my dad said to me, it was more about decision making, but what's the worst thing that can go wrong if you submit it to version too early, where you've got 63 commas that need to be semicolons? And so check in with your perfectionism. Know that your chimp is prone to making you want to make something bigger, better, add something else in. Trust your supervisor and revisit what is the purpose of finishing and submitting. It's actually to prove that you are a competent researcher, that you have considered and explored these topics that you're involved in, and that you are then able and fit to go into the world and be a professional researcher. Pessimism and picking on yourself. Oh my word. How many times do we not praise ourselves because we've done something really good? I love this image of the guy cutting off the branch. But we do that to ourselves. And let's look at it again. It's that inner chimp that is causing us problems. What is it we can do to really give it a boost? And I am no neuroscientist, hands up, but I'm really fascinated with how our brain works. Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow book. Great to read the book or get a digest version of it. But that chimp sits in our limbic system. It sits on the amygdala and it gets excited. The more excited the chimp gets, obviously it's a metaphorical chimp, the more excited, the more blood flow gets pumped into the amygdala and it gets bigger. And the bigger it gets, the more excited it gets, and the more it messes around with your head, whatever the natural traits you have that you're likely to. And we did a webinar recently and someone said, I have got 5 chimps in my head. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. We all have 5 chimps and maybe more, all doing their own thing at different times. And the problem is that the amygdala captures all that information that's coming into it and stops it drawing on that reference library of information we've got and accessing our facts, truth, and evidence that's stored in our prefrontal cortex, that logical part of our brain. And so what we need to do is start being able to tune into the things that we don't know. We need to be able to understand when we've got imposter syndrome, when we are not the superhero that we would like to think. We need to understand what are the characteristics about us that make us a superhero. And the things that can land on us, that undermine us, that kind of start chipping away at the branch or the sand under our feet. The first one's just a little feather. But before we know it, we've got a ton of feathers on our heads. And the reality is we know, don't we? I'm guessing that most of you are scientists and engineers. A ton of feathers is pretty heavy. It's just as heavy as a ton of anything, that big, great weight that can land on you. And they don't feel too good when that happens. One of the things we can tend to do is look across the office and look at other people who seem to be doing much better than us. We think, I'm sorry to pick on you, Kate, I hope you don't mind, just give me a smiley, so Kate, imagine Kate in the mornings scrolling around things. You think she's doing her literature review. In actual fact, she's just watching videos on Facebook or Twitter or TikTok or Instagram. And so never compare yourselves to anybody else. What's better, an apple or a pear, an apple or an orange? Effectively, they're both fruit, they're both sweet, they've both got fiber in them. The reality is that you are yourself and you are unique. I don't think we've got time to look at this, but when we use the image of this beautiful image of this luscious lawn, oh, if mine looked like that. And the diversity of things that people see is massive. From one interpretation is for somebody saying to me is I say that it's green, and that my husband counts the blades of grass. And when I was sharing the story with Helen, she said to me, I just see this amazingly comfy, lush place on a summer's afternoon to meet with people and drink wine. And someone else said to me in a workshop, oh, I wonder what the grass kind of grass it is. Is the stripes in the lawn? I wonder what the shrubs are at the back. So what we all see different things depending on the way that we're wired and the way that we think and the way we connect with the world around us. So what can we do about it? We need to tap into the clues to our innate talents and the ways we are, the yearning that we have to do things, the moments when we lose track of time. It might be writing an amazing piece of code. It might be finishing off a beautiful document or a lab report, finishing a series of experiments and getting a nice graph. Different things light the fire inside of us. But whilst we're doing that, we get in this kind of zone of flow. We lose track of time. We hit peaks of excellence. We learn incredibly quickly. And we get immense, deep satisfaction right in here. And it makes us smile. And the memory of it releases a great hit of dopamine. So knowing what you need is really important. So knowing what you're proud of, think about it. What are the things in your whole life you've done? You think, that was really cool. I love it. Write it down. What brings you joy? Write it down, because it makes you smile when you remember it. What do you do best? What is the greatest thing about you? Is it your values? Is it your connectivity with other people? Is it your support for people? Is it your ability to just get shit done? Or is it that you're just an amazingly great thinker? And what do you need to feed all those amazing talents that you have inside you? So I was so delighted to find this image, because for me, one of the best memories I've got in recent years was cycling hands-free. I just love it so much. The freedom, the power, that connectivity with the road, and being able to balance and steer the bike by shifting my weight a little bit. It just makes me smile just to think of it. 6 miles from Bournemouth all the way along to Christchurch on the beachfront on a beautiful day. You can't beat it. I love it. And that really helps my brain have a moment to just have a chill and a relax and chunt away in the background when I'm not thinking about anything. So when you're feeling blue, draw yourself a ladder and think, where am I feeling today? Or if you're feeling great, where am I? Check in with yourself in that little notebook around you and your make it your user manual. Check in with it and write in it, sticky notes, what energizes you and what frustrates you. Because I can absolutely be sure that what energizes me is likely to drain you. And the things that help me recover from moments when I've been stretching my capacity is going to be completely different than you. You might hate the idea of cycling hands-free along the beachfront, worried about the risks, about falling off, causing an accident, ruining my bike, whatever it might be. So we advocate here at Catalytic a positive psychology approach, focusing on what you do, not what you do wrong. Don't look at your strengths, not at your weaknesses. And by looking at performance against stress level, research shows that you've got if you're interested in the reference, it's from Harter and Stone in 2012, and it looks at stress levels and performance and the chemical changes in your body as you go through those stages. We want to work in the yellow stage. We want to know when we're getting to the edge of the orange stage phase, so we can then just be aware that it's okay, but we might need to pull back when that cortisol is beginning to surge through our bodies. And if we don't, we're going to push ourselves harder until we're going to move into the red zone, fueled by adrenaline. Self-care goes down, sleep goes down, general sense of well-being starts really crashing. You maybe can do it for a short amount of time, but what you're doing is you're living on your chimp's energy, not the rest of your brain. So use your brain. Know what you do when you're working in excellence. Know what the alerts are for you when your strengths are being stretched. What is your support system and mechanism? It could be somebody related to your research group, somebody completely different, somebody from a sports group, or whatever else you do for enjoyment. But make sure you give yourself space to recharge and get back into working with your strengths. One of the amazing things about our brain is, we think our brains are incredibly sophisticated, super clever. We're not even accessing most of them. But you know what? They're actually incredibly lazy. And we can do a workaround. So just take a quick look at this image and just put in the chat what you're feeling when you see it. It's a zingy lemon. If you're in your kitchen on a bright day and you get your sharp knife and you cut it, you take it out of the fruit bowl, it's really firm and shiny, cut through it, you get sprayed with zest. And then you cut it in half again and you smell it. That deep, luscious, zingy, zesty lemon flavor that's really doing it. And they just tell me in the chat, did you salivate whilst I was showing that to you? Did that make you salivate? And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because we can create a physical response in our bodies and in our brains by just thinking about something. So what I want you to do is, that those notices, that notebook, your well-being, your manual that helps you understand yourself, is keep notes of things, because those things about those moments of joy, that memory of feeling around cycling along Bournemouth beachfront, is going to give you that dopamine hit. And even if it's not only short-lived, it's going to give you a boost and make you feel like that you've had a lift. So 3 things to help you prevent that self-sabotage is, number 1, get to know who you are and what drives you. We use Clifton Strengths, and there is a small charge to use it, but it comes with a huge range of supportive material and video across 2 different websites. it's amazingly solid in giving you that understanding of who you are and what drives you. Recommend your supervisor takes it too. So use a strengths or values-based report tool. And so what I also suggest is, if you don't want to spend £20 on the Clifton Strengths Assessment, you can use Values in Action, which is free, or you could use the High Five Assessment, which isn't about sports supplements. I think Helen might put them in the chat. Again, it's free, but the level of support and knowledge behind it. And if you use Clifton Strengths, come and talk to us in our Strengths Jam. So take ownership of managing your supervisor relationship and meetings for yourself. We're going to send you it's draft, it's my first version of it, which is a preparation worksheet for going to meetings with your supervisor. And track your great moment memories to dip into boost your dopamine for a quick fix. So I hope that's been really useful. 3 things you can do to take ownership of managing your supervisor and prevent self-sabotage and enable you to be the best version of you and to enjoy more moments of that research journey than you currently perhaps do. So we offer a free Strengths Jam every month. There's ways to get in touch with us, and there's a few moments to for any questions